Podcast. I'm your host, AB.
And this week on Mama Murdered a Podcast, we're covering a case that will blow your freaking mind if you've never heard the details. And then it'll blow your mind if you have heard this story. If you have heard this, then this is one that you are sure to remember because it is just that damn crazy. This week we're covering the case of Sherri Papini. And before I say let's get it, I need to give a shout out to the newest Patreon members and just let you all know how much I love and appreciate every single one of you. So this week we are shouting out Samantha, Kristen Tate, Keisha Collins, and Shahara Braswell. Or maybe that's just Sarah with a lot of letters. Either way, thank you and I love you, every one of you. So if you heard your name and you still haven't gotten your stickers, please reach out to me on the Patreon app or even on social media. Just somewhere, send me your mailing address so you can get your stickers. Now, with all of that being said, and without further ado, let's get it. Sherri Papini was born to her parents, Rich and Loretta Greoff, maybe? Greoff? She was born on June 11th in 1982, and she grew up in Redding, California. Sherri attended Central Valley High School, which sounds like something straight out of Degrassi or Seventh Heaven, or maybe even some other 90s and early 2000s kind of TV show. Like, we attend Central Valley High. But little did anyone know that Sherri would actually meet her future husband in middle school. Sherri and Keith met during their time in middle school, and even though middle school romances rarely ever last, I mean, I guess I'm living proof that they can, but they usually don't. Sherri and Keith's romance would also last into adulthood, though. Keith Papini was a 7th grader, and Sherri was an 8th grader when the two of them shared their first kiss with one another. But Sherri eventually moved away, and the two of them lost touch for a little while. After they lost touch, and as the two of them got older, Sherri would also meet and marry a man by the name of David in 2006. David was in the Army and he was supposed to be deploying soon. And during his deployment, he would have been sent overseas for quite a while. And while this is usually reported on as a regular marriage, it doesn't seem to be a marriage at all from what I could gather. Because from what I gathered, this thing between Sherri and David seemed to be more of an agreement between the two, and not really what I would consider a marriage. While Sherri and David did have a marriage certificate, they also both claimed that they never lived together. And they also claimed that they only ever got married because Sherri needed health insurance, basically. From what I understood from the digging that I did, that's what it seems like. And the military does usually offer pretty good health insurance, at least for active members, because we won't get into how they treat our vets. That's a different podcast for a different platform on a different day. But that seems kind of like the agreement and the arrangement that Sherri and David had between each other. Was that they would get married, Sherri would have health insurance, and they would just live happily ever after until they fell in love with somebody else, I guess. But eventually Sherri would start blogging about different parts of her life, so later on during this case, we do get a little more in-depth with some of the entries of Sherri's blog about her marriage and her wedding and how things came to be between she and Keith. It seems like Sherri and David were still technically married when Sherri and Keith first started dating, so essentially, from what I've been able to gather from the blog entries and such, Sherri was technically still legally married to David when she and Keith first started dating. So, Sherri and Keith would have been dating before Sherri and David's divorce was finalized. And I just want to throw that out there so that nobody's confused. And honestly, I can't tell if Sherri was trying to hide it from Keith that she was still married or not. Hell, I can't even tell if Keith ever knew that Sherri had even been married before him or not, if I'm being honest. But whether Keith knew about Sherri's previous marriage or not isn't important. What is important is that the people that knew Sherri the best all say that she preferred to be the center of attention at all cost. They even say that Sherri would go as far as to make up some random diagnosis that she'd recently gotten from a doctor in order to keep the attention on herself. She would claim to have a new diagnosis, even if it was completely made up and imaginary, not even a real diagnosis, but she would do that to be able to tell people about it to keep the attention on herself. But then it was like she would completely forget about all of the previous diagnoses that she'd told people about in previous months or weeks or whatever, and she would act like she had no idea what they were even talking about when they asked her about previous diagnoses, while she was still telling them about new diagnoses that she created just to keep the attention on herself. So it was always something new with Sherri, and it always had to be something that would for sure keep your attention on her. As long as all eyes were on Sherri, all was right in the world. Now, David and Sherri eventually end their marriage agreement legally and on paper in December of 2008. And it seems like once David was done serving his tour, and once he was back, that's kind of when he and Sherri decided to file for divorce. Now, somewhere in the midst of all of this, Sherri had moved back to her hometown of Redding, California, and it was here in Redding that Sherri would finally find her happily ever after when she was able to rekindle an old flame with Keith Papini, again who she'd shared her first kiss with in middle school. Sherri and Keith had quote-unquote dated in middle school as much as a young teenager who can't drive can date, but they dated when they were both in middle school together. And here they were all these years later bumping into each other again. And by the time that Keith and Sherri ran into each other as adults, Sherri had already started blogging, so we actually have Sherri's first-hand account of how their relationship started back up after all these years apart. So in Sherri's blog on mywedding.com, she wrote, quote, "The first date was nerve-wracking, lots of catching up and sharing stories. The following day, Keith called me and I said that I wanted to take him out. I told him to meet me out at the docks at Whiskeytown Lake. I set up a candlelit dinner by the water. He showed up and had a gift for me. It was a box filled with the notes I had written him in the 8th grade. I couldn't believe he kept them. It was a great night. By our third date, we were head over heels in love and have spent every day together since. I have never been so happy. We always laugh and we always smile. We enjoy each other's company and make a great team. We're best friends and a perfect couple. I'm happy to say that I will soon be Mrs. Keith Papini and will spend the rest of my life in love and full of joy." Now, first of all, what, if anything, stuck out in this blog entry to you? Because for me, this is so clearly the honeymoon phase of a relationship, which is fine. And I'll even go as far as to say that my husband is probably my best friend in the entire world, and I would legitimately die for him. We don't argue very often. When we do, we don't scream, we don't fight, we don't throw things. We're overall happy. But I would never in my entire lifetime try to claim that we are a perfect couple. Who says that? That is one of the biggest things for me throughout this thing. It seems like Sherri very much cares what other people think of her and her relationship and even her lifestyle. I can't think of another reason why she would feel the need to tell complete strangers on the internet that she's in a perfect relationship, that they are the perfect couple. So, anyways, after the dating stage was over for this perfect couple, they did eventually get married, and their wedding website blog is actually still up, and it shares in detail literally every single step of their wedding planning process. And when I say every single step, I mean every single step. Down to the appointment for the dress shopping. It even details how they had to change the wedding venue a few times, and even the times and dates that Keith and Sherri took their engagement pictures. All of that's on the blog. So now the Papinis are married, and they had this perfect wedding, their perfect relationship, the perfect marriage, and the perfect life together. And soon after, they'd go on to have 2 kids together, a son who we're just going to refer to as T, and a daughter who we're going to refer to as V. Sherri was, for all intents and purposes, living the literal American dream. She had the best kind of husband. Keith seemed to be the type that would, worship the ground that Sherri walked on. And Sherri said that Keith would do all the good husband things, like take care of her when she was sick, and she said that the 2 of them were always trying to prank one another. Sherri and Keith had the most adorable kids, and a lot of people often referred to Sherri as Supermom. And they didn't call her Supermom for no reason. People that knew Sherri said that she was the kind of mom that would hand make snacks for the kids' class, that all of the snacks were made from scratch, and that they were always perfectly decorated, perfectly wrapped, and looked like something that you would see on a cooking show instead of a kindergarten classroom. But the Supermom status came from more than just handmade scratch cookies and brownies for school. People that knew the family best said that Sherri was the type of mom that would wake up, get the kids dressed, and already have their meals planned out for the day. She would also have all of their activities planned out for the day and timed out perfectly. And she looked perfect while she did all of this. And Sherri wasn't just Supermom, though. She was super wife, too. She wouldn't just make dinner. She would make everything from scratch and then present it in a way where it almost looked too good to even eat. Sherri and Keith's 2 young kids, T and V, went to daycare most days while Keith went to work at Best Buy and Sherri stayed home as a stay-at-home mom. Things for the Papini family sound perfect. Maybe even a little bit too perfect. Because on Wednesday, November 2nd of 2016, it was a very normal day in the Papini house. Keith left for work like he normally did. The kids went to daycare, and at about 10:47 a.m., Sherri sent Keith a text message asking if he was planning to come home for his lunch break. The text actually said something more along the lines of, "Are you going to come home and have sex with your wife on your lunch break?" And Keith texted Sherri back and just said, "No, sorry, I'm going to have a long day." Essentially, he was just telling Sherri that he wasn't going to have time to come home for lunch, that he would just see her later. Now, after this text, Sherri texted again, this time just to let Keith know that she would grab the kids from daycare later, and that she would see him when he got home from work. And that was the last time that Sherri and Keith spoke to each other. When Keith got off of work and went home, Sherri and neither of the kids were in the house. But Sherri's car was still parked in the driveway, so Keith assumed that maybe Sherri had just gone outside with the kids for something. Keith walked around the yard, and he still didn't see his wife or kids. When Keith looked around the house again, though, he saw that there were Christmas presents that were laying out on the floor. Some were wrapped, and some still needed to be wrapped. So Keith kind of assumed that maybe Sherri had just left the gifts out just long enough for her to get in a run before everybody else got home from work and daycare. Sherri had recently started running as a hobby again, but when Keith called and texted Sherri, she wasn't responding. So this is when Keith decided to pull up the Find My iPhone app. And for anybody who doesn't know, Find My iPhone is just an app. It's a way for you to be able to track the last known location of a phone. Anybody that allows you to have permission to track their phone, you can always see where they are. So if Keith and Sherri shared locations with one another, then they would have both been able to see where the other one was at all times. Now, after pulling up the Find My iPhone app, Keith saw that Sherri's last known location for her phone was pinging at their mailbox. But the mailbox to the Papini's house was about a mile away from their actual home. So it's not like the phone was just pinging right at the end of their driveway or something. It would have been more than a mile away from their house and their driveway. So Keith jumped into Sherri's car and rode the mile or so away to their mailbox. Keith rode that way just to see if maybe Sherri had gone for a run or maybe taken the kids on a nature walk, because that's something that she would have done pretty regularly. And like I mentioned already, Sherri had just recently picked up running again, and her family had all been training to run in this benefit run. The plan was for everyone in the family to dress up in a superhero costume, and then they'd all run the benefit run together. So this was a logical thought on Keith's part. It was a good possibility that Sherri had just gone for a late run. But when Keith got to the mailboxes, Sherri and the kids weren't there either. Keith got out of the car and he walked around the area where Sherri's phone location had last pinged. But he doesn't see anyone. He does see something, though. While Keith is walking around the area looking for his wife and his 2 kids, he finds Sherri's phone. Now, there's also a pair of corded earbuds with the phone, and the cord to the earbuds is still plugged into the port on Sherri's phone, and then the cord to the earbuds were kind of wrapped around Sherri's phone. After a little further inspection of the phone and the corded earbuds, though, Keith also saw what looked like Sherri's long blonde hair wrapped around the cord for the earbuds. And I'll post a picture of the phone and the cords and exactly how Keith found it on social media so that you can see it. Now, Keith found all of these things on the side of the road nearby the mailboxes. And the way that he found all these things made him immediately think that maybe the earbuds had been ripped out of Sherri's ear and that maybe her phone had possibly been dropped and her hair had been pulled out in the process. And that's really the only thing that made sense as to why her phone and her earbuds would be laying on the road like that. And when Keith picked Sherri's iPhone up off the grass, he could see that the song playing on the phone and through the earbuds was their wedding song. The song Everything by Michael Bublé was playing on repeat. This is when Keith realized that if Sherri's car was home and she wasn't on a run or a nature walk with the kids, then where were the kids? So Keith called the daycare center where the 2 kids attended, and he asked the daycare worker that answered the phone what time Sherri had picked the kids up that day. But the daycare worker informed Keith that Sherri hadn't picked the kids up from daycare yet. The kids were still at daycare now, which was unusual. Because normally Sherri would have picked the kids up sometime between 4:15 and 4:45 p.m., and she did this every day. Because remember, this is super mom and super wife that we're talking about. This is not a mom like me. Because you can bet your last dollar that I will always be late for anything for absolutely no reason. I'm pretty sure it's genetic, but we're going to leave that part out. So, Sherri's completely the opposite of that. She would have never waited until the last minute to pick her kids up from daycare. It just wasn't like her. Sherri had picked the kids up every single day from daycare within the same time frame. So, now Keith is for sure worried. Keith called his own mom to see if maybe she had spoken to Sherri or maybe if she knew something that he didn't. So, Keith called his own mom to see if she knew anything that Sherri had planned that evening or to see if maybe she knew why Sherri was running late to get the kids. But Keith's mom didn't know anything that Keith didn't know. So she hadn't spoken to Sherri earlier and she had no idea what was going on either. And immediately after this, Keith calls 911 at 5:41 p.m. And I'm just going to play you that 911 call real quick.
911, what is your emergency? CHP transfer. Keith is on the line. Hello, can I help you?
Yeah, I just got home from work, and my wife wasn't there, which is unusual, and my kids should have been there by now from, daycare. So I was like, oh, maybe she went on a walk. I couldn't find her, so I called the daycare to see what time she picked up the kids. The kids were never picked up, so I got freaked out, so I hit, the Find My iPhone app thing, and it said that it showed her phone, at our end of our driveway. We don't have really good service.
Okay.
Not the end of our driveway, but the end of our street. So I just drove down there, and I saw her phone with her headphones because she started running again. And I found her phone, and it's got, hair ripped out of it, in the headphones. So I'm, totally freaking out, thinking, somebody, grabbed her.
Okay, what's your address?
Redding.
Okay, what's your last name?
Yes. Papini, P-A-P-I-N-I.
And your first name?
Keith.
K-E-I-T-H?
Yes.
Okay. Did you go pick up your children?
No, I'm going to call my mom and have her do it.
Okay. What's your wife's name?
I'm going to, knock on every door. Sherri. S-H-E-R-R-I.
And same last name?
Yes.
She white, female?
Yes.
What's her date of birth?
It is June 11th, 1982.
Is her vehicle there? Does she not have a vehicle?
She has a vehicle at the house.
Okay, the vehicle is at the house?
She's running.
How? Okay.
Yes, I'm in it right now driving, and I took a picture of her phone on the ground before I picked it up.
Okay, how tall is she?
5'3", 5'4".
How much does she weigh?
100 pounds.
Eye color?
Like a bluish blue.
Okay, hair color?
Blonde.
Do you know what she was wearing? Is there
No
something
idea.
she always wears?
I'm assuming she went running, so
Okay,
probably running athletic type clothes.
Okay, there's not an outfit she always wears or anything like that. Does she run with a dog or by herself?
by herself.
Okay. What time were the kids
She just started running again, and we live in a...
When's the last time? When's the last time you heard from her?
She sent me a text asking me if I was coming home for lunch.
What time was that?
Give me 1 second. She sent me a text at 10:47 asking me if I was coming home from lunch from work. And I said, sorry, long day. And that was the last. Never spoke to her on the phone, never any other contact.
Okay, and what time are the kids supposed to be picked up?
Way before 5:30. She usually goes at like 4:45.
Okay.
4:30, 4:45.
Okay, are you headed back to the house, or where are you at right now?
I'm at the end of the driveway where I'm at the Old Oregon Trail and Sunrise where they meet, because that's right where I found her phone on the ground. You're telling me that something happened to her is the way I'm looking at it. There's then there was hair in the headphones. Like it got ripped off, they grabbed.
Yeah, no, I understand.
Okay, I'm sorry. I know you're trying to keep me calm, but obviously.
Yeah. What kind of vehicle are you in?
I'm in a black Kia Optima. Oh my God.
Okay.
And we live down kind of a sketchy street, so I don't know if I'm allowed to knock on everybody's door, but I will if I'm allowed to do that.
Well, let's just have the officers contact you so they can start, processing everything, figure out what's going on, okay? And I understand you're freaking out a little bit. We want to make sure we get your kids, make sure they're okay.
Yeah, I'm going to call my mom and have her.
Yeah, they've been stuck at your phone number.
Yes. Do you want me to wait right here for somebody, or?
If you want to head back to your residence so they can contact you there, and in case she does return.
Okay.
Okay. We'll have them contact you at your residence. Call us back if anything changes, all right?
All right, so they're going to call the number you just took down, the 355?
They'll probably call you when they're on their way, and they're going to come out in person.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, bye.
Bye-bye.
So, Keith sounds like a worried husband. He does say that he picked Sherri's phone up, which was potential evidence, so that's now been tampered with, even if it was tampered with unintentionally. And I'm not sure that most people would have even been thinking clearly enough to even think to take a picture of how you found your missing spouse's phone. So, kudos to Keith for that. It just doesn't seem like something that most people would think to do. Now, maybe if you're big into true crime, then you would know not to touch the phone at all if you thought your spouse was missing, but I don't know. I just don't think that anybody would be thinking clearly enough to be like, let me take a picture of exactly how I found your phone so I can show police. But he did, and that's great. So, of course, Keith ends the call, and he calls his mom to see if she can grab the kids from daycare while he tries to figure out what's going on with Sherri, and while he waits for the police to show up, and of course, his mom agrees. And when the police show up at the Papini house and they start searching, they also had patrol cars riding around the area, and they already had helicopters searching overhead using spotlights. Police blocked off the area where Keith found Sherri's phone, and they started looking for any other clues or tips that they may be able to use. During their searches, of course, police were talking to neighbors and looking for eyewitnesses during their search. And there were actually a few people who saw Sherri running right near the spot where her phone was found at, indicating that Sherri was for sure a missing person, and Sherri going missing captivated the nation. And it's what is a lot of times referred to as missing white girl syndrome, because so many times it's small, cute white girls that come from good homes and good backgrounds that get the most attention in the media. And as sickening as that is to even say out loud, it's true, and this case was no different. Shortly after Sherri was reported missing, damn near everybody knew her name and knew her face. And there was a press release of everyone in the family begging the public for Sherri's safe return. And during these interviews and press conferences, you can clearly see that Keith is just distraught. You can see it all over his face. You can hear it in his voice. He just wants his wife to come back home. And everyone who knew Sherri that did interviews, they all said the same thing, that Sherri would never just willingly walk away from her husband and kids. They all say that Sherri wouldn't do anything to interrupt the family's day-to-day routine, which is all the more reason to think that something did happen to her. Because there's a potential if she was somebody who stuck to the same schedule and the same routine day in and day out without fail, that maybe somebody was watching her, they learned her routine, and then maybe they finally found the perfect moment to grab her. But regardless of what theories were floating around at the time, everyone seemed to have been on the same page as far as thinking that Sherri would have had to have been taken against her will. And eventually, a $50,000 reward for information was offered to the public. And police checked to see if anyone in the area of where Sherri disappeared from had surveillance cameras that may have caught something on footage. And police checked into sex offenders in and around the area where Sherri disappeared from. There were billboards that went up, candlelit vigils that were held, balloon releases, search parties, and her missing persons flyers were scattered all over the area. And police officers made it known to the public that they believed that Sherri was missing and in danger. Now, on November the 4th, a GoFundMe page was started by a friend of the family, and it was said that any money raised would be given to the Papini family to help cover their expenses of their own searches and their own investigative tactics. The GoFundMe page that was set up raised over $49,000, and most of the donations were coming in from complete strangers. Again, this is why it's referred to as missing white girl syndrome. It sucks, it's pathetic, it is what it is though. Now, after all this, there was a random guy who was an anonymous donor to the Sherri Papini search. He donated upwards of $100,000 after he saw Keith pleading on his interview for his wife's safe return. This man never wanted his name released to the public, and even Keith didn't know this man's name, which is crazy. So, everybody was kind of thinking and assuming that Sherri was potentially picked up for human trafficking. But once the surveillance cameras were pulled from the places and houses in the area where Sherri's phone was found, nothing suspicious was found on any of the surveillance footage. And of course, in a case like this, the spouse is always suspect number one because, as we all know, the husband didn't make it on a t-shirt for no reason. But Keith was actually pretty easily ruled out, and that happened fairly quickly. Keith let police search his house. He turned over all of his vehicles without any search warrant. He offered up his DNA. He took a polygraph, and he never brought in a lawyer with him to be questioned or interviewed. Keith also handed over all of his electronics, and he gave consent for police to dig as far into his electronics as they needed to go to be able to prove that he was at work at Best Buy when Sherri went missing. Keith literally did every single thing that an innocent husband would do. Keith was giving police anything and everything that they needed to be able to rule him out. He just wanted police to be able to rule him out completely. That way they could focus on looking for whoever was actually responsible for his wife's disappearance. But there were no clues or tips leading to where Sherri may have been, and the days were ticking away. No one could figure out who or why someone would have just seemingly plucked this perfect wife from her perfect life for absolutely no reason. And then on November 24th in 2016, there was finally a clue, a tip, a something that police could actually work with. Now, mind you, Sherri was reported missing on November 2nd. The next big thing didn't happen until November 24th, so 22 days later. But it was on November 24th in 2016 that a woman by the name of Allison Sutton was driving herself and her young daughter to visit some family members to celebrate the Thanksgiving holiday. So Allison Sutton was just kind of driving along near Sacramento, California, when she saw a super thin, white, blonde-haired woman walking down the side of the road. But since Allison had her young daughter with her, she didn't stop to check on this woman that she'd seen walking. She just drove right past her, which I don't blame her. I think I would have done the exact same thing because we don't pick up strangers, and we damn sure don't pick up strangers with kids in the car. But the woman that Allison had driven past was Sherri Papini. Now, this sighting was about 150 miles from Redding, California, where Sherri had been reported missing from. And again, everyone had missing white girl syndrome at this time, so everybody had been on the lookout for Sherri. Everybody knew what she looked like. Everybody knew she was missing. So Allison called 911 to report that she thought she had just driven past California's very own missing supermom. Allison didn't actually stop the car to check on the woman that she thought was Sherri, but she did call it in. Now, luckily, there was also a truck driver that had seen Sherri walking down the side of the road too, but the truck driver did stop to check on Sherri. And the truck driver stayed with Sherri until the police arrived on scene. And the scene wasn't pretty. Sherri basically had chains from head to toe. She had chains on her wrist, her ankles, her arms, and she looked a hot damn mess. Once police arrived, Sherri was immediately taken to the hospital. She only weighed about 100 pounds when she had first gone missing, and she weighed even less than that when she'd got to the hospital for her first initial examination. Sherri had lost roughly 15 pounds in just 22 days that she'd been missing for. She also had super long blonde hair before her abduction, and now her hair was short and choppy and very obviously cut. It almost looked like her hair had been cut crooked on purpose. That's how choppy it was. Sherri also had different bruises that were all in different stages of healing, which would obviously indicate that the injuries had been inflicted at different times for the bruises to be in different stages of healing. Sherri had burn marks all over her body, her nose was swollen, her pelvis was bruised, she had rashes on her inner thighs and arms, and her face was covered in bruises, with obvious signs that she had been tied up by her wrists and ankles. Sherri was found in pretty rough shape, but she was alive. Keith was called and told that Sherri had been found walking down the highway, and even though she was in pretty rough shape, he was told that she was alive. And obviously, Keith left his home and went to the hospital to go be with his wife. No one cared that her hair was cut. No one cared that she was much thinner than she had been. She was alive, and that was all that her husband and kids really cared about. And of course, police were glad that Sherri was back home and alive, but it is their literal job to figure out what happened to Sherri and to try to figure out who had done all these awful things to her. Sherri had been missing for 22 days. That's a lot of police resources that were used in the search to try to find Sherri. And with the shape that Sherri was found in, somebody was going to have to be held accountable for it. And now it would be the police's job to try to figure out all these things. But Sherri really wasn't cooperating with police, though. She said that she couldn't tell them anything because the two women that had taken her had told her that they both had ties to the police. So basically, Sherri's trying to say that the two women who had taken her would be tipped off if she talked to the police. So since Sherri felt like she couldn't talk to the police got a little creative. Instead of police going in and questioning Sherri, the police actually sent Keith in with a list of questions to ask Sherri. And they sent him in with an audio recorder to record Sherri being asked the questions, and then he would also have to record Sherri's response to the question. And I'm here to tell y'all, I have watched, read, listened to, and followed thousands and thousands of true crime cases throughout my lifetime, and never have I ever seen police do anything like this in any other case. I guess they did what they had to do in order to jumpstart the investigation, and I'm here for it. So when Sherri was found and taken to the hospital, she wasn't wearing the same clothes that she'd last been seen running in. She was in different clothes when she was found. But she did tell the hospital staff that she was wearing the same underwear that she'd been wearing on the day of her disappearance, though. So a different outfit, but the same underwear. Sherri told Keith on the audio recording device that she'd been abducted by two Hispanic women. Sherri also says that both of these women spoke in only Spanish for most of the time that she was there. And Sherri wasn't fluent in Spanish, so she only understood very small amounts of what the two women were saying while she was held against her will. Sherri also told Keith during this creative questioning that the two women also had something to cover their faces always, and that they always both wore gloves. Sherri gives a description of these two women by saying that one of them was younger, she was Hispanic with long curly brown hair, and that she had very thin eyebrows and pierced ears. Now, Sherri says that the other woman was the older and meaner woman out of the two, and the older woman was described by Sherri as having much thicker eyebrows than the first one. And she also says that the older woman had straight black hair, and this is essentially the only kind of description that Sherri was able to give on either one of these women. And we also find out during this creative questioning that the police are having Keith do, that Sherri was given some kind of branding that was burned on her skin by the two women that had taken her. So I'm sure we're all wondering what happened here. we're talking about 2 women taking and torturing another woman for over 3 weeks, which is rare enough in itself. And now she's saying that she was branded like cattle by these 2 women too? Okay, so let's go over what Sherri says happened on the day that she was taken while she was out for a run when she was reported missing. Sherri says that she had gone out for a run, and while she was running, an SUV stopped near her. Now, Sherri says that she kind of assumed that this car had stopped to ask for directions or something, but that when the door to the SUV opened, Sherri says that there was a woman holding a gun. This is when Sherri says that the 2 women told her to put down her phone and to get in the vehicle. Sherri did as she was told. And this is when Sherri says that one of the women put something over her head, and Sherri says that she also believed that they drugged her with something. She says that she thinks that she was drugged because as soon as they covered her head, she was stuck with something. After she felt something stick her, which I'm assuming was a needle, Sherri says that she started having trouble staying awake, and that she was finding herself waking up and not being able to, keep her eyes open before she was dozing back off. So, police got Keith to ask Sherri if she could remember anything about the roads that she had driven on with these 2 women in this SUV. Like, for example, were the roads curvy or bumpy or paved or were they gravel? Just anything like that. Sherri says that she doesn't remember the way the roads felt and that she doesn't know how much time elapsed after she was drugged. But Sherri did say that she remembered that the car smelled like sewage, though, which is disgusting. So this doesn't help police figure out where these 2 women may have taken Sherri or how far away the abduction site was from where she had been kept. It really didn't help with anything, actually. Sherri was able to tell police through Keith's questioning that when she got to wherever these 2 women had taken her, that she was put into a closet and then kept there. Inside of this closet, Sherri was chained to a metal pole. She says this pole was huge, and she says that she was able to reach the bed from where she was chained up at, but that she wasn't able to reach the door handle to the room or closet that she was being kept in. So the chain was long enough that she could reach the bed, but not the doorknob from the spot where she had been chained up at. And also, how big is this closet that they are keeping her in? Because it's big enough to fit a bed? Okay. I don't know. I guess we'll keep going. Sherri also made it a point to say that these 2 women also played, quote-unquote, that really loud, annoying Mexican music. And those are her words, not mine. Now, Sherri says that the music would play from this big speaker that was right outside of the room that she was kept in. She also says that the room that she was kept in was always cold and that it was almost always raining at nighttime while she was there. Sherri says that after she was chained up, that the 2 women filled a plastic tub with kitty litter, and that's where Sherri would be forced to use the restroom at. But Sherri says that she did get to shower while she was there. She says that the younger of the 2 women was the one who watched her while she showered to make sure that she didn't try to escape. Sherri also said that if the 2 women ever thought that she was being too loud, that they would take the blankets and pillows away from her as punishment. And when Sherri was asked about food, she claimed that she was only ever given Spanish rice and tortilla shells to eat and that she was only given 1 bottle of drinking water a day. Sherri also claimed that when the 2 women read about her abduction in the newspapers, that they would laugh at her and tell her that nobody was looking for her and that everybody was just going to think that she ran away on her own. Now, Sherri did say that she did try to escape once, but she was unsuccessful. So after she'd tried escaping, the 2 women told her that she was going to be sold to a man who liked his women branded. And that this buyer was also a police officer. So no one would ever find out who Sherri was sold to or who sold her to this police officer. So this all sounds crazy, right? Right. What's even crazier than that is that Sherri says that she was just thrown into a car one day in the early morning hours and that she was just kind of tossed out of the car onto the highway, which is when the 2 witnesses called in that they'd seen a woman walking, that she was battered and beaten on the highway. And that's basically all that Sherri recalled from her entire 22 days in captivity. That's it. Everything I've told you is all she could remember. Now, the clothes that Sherri was found in were a pair of light gray sweatpants and a dark-colored sweatshirt. And again, Sherri was still wearing the same underwear that she'd been wearing on the day that she was taken. But when the sweatpants and the sweatshirt that Sherri was found in after 22 days in captivity was tested, the clothes came back with both male and female DNA on them. And investigators tested the male and female DNA that was found on the sweatpants and the shirt. They tested it and ran it through every database that was available, and nothing came up as a match. So at this point, investigators are wondering if maybe the male DNA is possibly from one of the two women's boyfriends, like the two women that supposedly kidnapped her. But it could have even been transfer DNA, and police considered that. Transfer DNA is super easily swapped by people in your surroundings all the time. So someone that you're too close to at the grocery store, y'all are probably potentially swapping DNA, like transfer DNA, and you don't even know it. So that's a possibility too. And at this point, we don't know if the DNA was sperm, sweat, saliva, or what. We just know that it was some kind of DNA found. Now, at the hospital, Sherri was also tested to see if she had been sexually assaulted during her 22 days in captivity. And after the testing, it was determined that she had not been sexually assaulted. And the police were trying everything that they could think of to get Sherri to remember more information than what they had been able to get out of her so far. Because like I said, everything I've told you already is all that she could remember, literally. So police are showing Sherri a whole lineup of different model SUVs, and these were all pictures of SUVs that police had actually pulled from surveillance footage in the area that Sherri was taken from on the same day that she was taken. So all of these SUVs were in the area at the time and the day that she was taken. And they were just trying to see if Sherri could identify just one of them so that they would have a lead to go off of, but she never could. Police also brought in a sketch artist to work with Sherri to try to create a sketch of the two Hispanic women that had taken her. And I feel like it's important to say this. So the police were only asking Sherri to be able to help with the sketch from the eyes and the forehead of the two women who had taken her. Because Sherri had already said that they'd always wore something to cover their faces, so that's all she would have seen was their forehead and eyes. That's all they asked of her. And you can find these sketches with a quick Google search if you want to check them out, but pro tip, don't waste your time. And then police started to question the reason behind Sherri's abduction. Because yes, she was skinny, pretty, and white, but there had been no ransom demand and no human trafficking ring that could be tied back to her abduction. It just wasn't making a whole lot of sense. So this is when police started asking people harder questions. But it wouldn't be until 2017 that police started going through phone records and bank records and things like that. And when they were going through phone records, police come across a man that Sherri had been talking to for a good while before her abduction. Now, this man didn't live close by to Sherri or the abduction spot or anything like that, but police were able to verify that this man had visited California just a few days before Sherri's abduction. The man hadn't been visiting Redding, where Sherri lived, but he had been in California nevertheless. And police weren't able to prove that Sherri and this man had ever met up or anything like that, but they were eventually able to rule this guy out, which got them asking more questions. Investigators did think it was a little bit weird that Sherri had this man's number programmed in her phone under a fake name, so that her husband Keith didn't know that she'd been in contact with another man. And through a little more digging, police were starting to think that it was possible, and even probable, that Sherri could have planned out and then executed her own kidnapping and torture. Because if you think about it, she couldn't remember anything except the few things we've already gone over, and there had been, no new flashes of memory that could come back to her. And police were still scratching their heads about why the kidnappers would just let Sherri go for no reason. And the idea that maybe Sherri was taken for human trafficking didn't make a whole lot of sense either. Because they wouldn't have starved and beaten her, and they probably wouldn't have cut her long blonde hair. That would have been a selling point, So from here, it took 5 years of what ifs and what could have beens from these investigators. But some shit had come out since Sherri had first been taken, beaten, and starved and then dropped off on the side of the highway. You see, Sherri's ex-boyfriend had told investigators that Sherri had actually been staying with him at his house in Orange County, California, on all the dates that Sherri had been, quote-unquote, missing for. Not just that, though. This ex-boyfriend also told investigators that Sherri had actually reached out to him asking if he could pick her up in Redding, where she lived with Keith and the kids. So, let's just keep going. Let's just keep going. Now, remember the clothes that Sherri had been wearing when she was quote-unquote found, okay? So, investigators got a DNA sample from Sherri's ex-boyfriend to see if it matched the DNA that was found on the clothes that she'd been wearing when she was quote-unquote found. And what do you know? That DNA matched Sherri's ex-boyfriend perfectly. And then investigators pulled back out those old trusty phone records. And those phone records show that Sherri and this ex-boyfriend had actually been in touch as early as December of 2015. The ex-boyfriend also told investigators that he and Sherri used burner phones to keep in touch with one another so that Keith wouldn't find out that they were talking. And investigators were actually able to corroborate this by going through the 2 burner phones that Sherri's ex had turned over to the police. One of the burner phones had always pinged at the ex-boyfriend's location, and the second burner phone had always pinged at Sherri's location. And there was even a cousin of Sherri's ex-boyfriend who had come forward to say that he had seen Sherri at the ex-boyfriend's house 2 different times during the 22 days that Sherri had been reported missing for. And then it was about 3 weeks, or 22 days, after Sherri had been reported missing, that Sherri's ex-boyfriend had gotten a friend to rent a car for him. And this would be the car that he would drop Sherri off on the side of the highway with. And of course, this was also pretty easy to fact check. They just went through rental car company agreements and found the friend of the ex-boyfriend's name, and the mileage matched the rental car that would have driven from the ex-boyfriend's house to this drop-off spot. All the mileage matched up perfectly. Now, Sherri's ex-boyfriend did tell police that it had always been the plan for Sherri to go back home after she was reported missing. So she never planned on leaving and staying gone. She always planned to go home. And he also said that Sherri had asked him multiple times to hit her while she stayed with him for those 22 days, but he always refused. Now, he did say that he did the brand on Sherri, like burned her skin with metal. He did that. So he wouldn't hit her, but he would brand her. And he says that he did the brand for her because she asked him to. Okay, got it. This ex also said that he would hold a hockey stick while Sherri ran into it a bunch of times, and that he would hit hockey pucks at Sherri's body. He only did it a few times, and he only did it because she begged him to, obviously. And according to the way that I understood it, this ex-boyfriend wasn't really charged with anything as far as like abuse or assault or anything like that goes. They were just kind of looking at it like he was a friend doing what another friend had asked him to do. So if I ask one of y'all to hit me and you do it, then, you were only doing what I asked you to do, you know? Sherri's ex-boyfriend did say that Sherri had told him that she was just going to use this time away to get away from her abusive husband. And I just want to say that there is absolutely nothing that points to Keith Papini abusing Sherri, ever. If anything, it's the complete opposite of that. And then finally, in 2020, Sherri was confronted with the facts that her kidnapping story just wasn't adding up. Sherri sat in front of a federal investigator and told him that she had in fact been kidnapped and that she didn't have anything to do with it. Now, at this point, Sherri doesn't know that her ex-boyfriend has spilled all the tea. So finally, investigators confront her with all the things that her ex-boyfriend said and all the things that they could prove. And she does try to keep the lies up. She tells the investigator that she doesn't know what this ex is talking about and yada, yada, yada. But once the investigators lay out the fact that the DNA evidence matches her ex-boyfriend, the burner phones only ever pinged in their 2 locations, and that their eyewitnesses' accounts of seeing her at her ex-boyfriend's house during the dates that she was supposedly missing for. And after being confronted with all of that and more, Sherri Papini was finally charged on March 3rd, 2022, more than 5 years after her fake abduction. But all that she was charged with was making false statements and mail fraud. But by Sherri faking her own kidnapping, she had wasted more than $30,000 of the state assistance funds that could have been used on real kidnap victims. So, of course, she was ordered to pay back that $30,000, but on top of that $30,000, she was also ordered to pay back more than $300,000 in restitution and that money would be used to pay back the federal, state, and local agencies that wasted their time, money, and resources looking for her ass. Sherri did end up pleading guilty to both charges after something was worked out through a plea agreement, and from the way I understood it, the mail fraud charges were not only for the money that the state and federal levels were using to try to find her, but it also had something to do with the thousands and thousands of people who had donated to her GoFundMe account to try to help in the search efforts for her, before she was just miraculously dropped off on the side of the highway by her imaginary kidnappers. And investigators basically said that if Sherri would have just told them the truth from the jump, that she probably would have never been charged with anything. But since they did end up spending so much time and money and resources on her elaborate-ass story, that's the only reason they went forward with charges. Now, Keith Papini filed for divorce 2 days after Sherri pled guilty on the 2 charges that was filed against her, and he also filed for custody of their 2 kids. And as of now, in 2024, Sherri only gets to see her kids during 1-hour visits that are supervised by a professional agency that was appointed by a judge. Sherri did her little short prison stint, and since her release, Keith and Sherri have been battling in court over their divorce, their kids, their finances, their properties, everything, basically. And Keith uses the fact that the 2 of them would still be together had Sherri not plotted and planned this entire stunt. He uses that as part of his defense because he's not wrong. Because if police hadn't kept looking into this case, Sherri would probably still be lying to everybody's face, including Keith, in order to keep up her secret. Now, knowing that this entire case was plotted, planned, executed, and not an all-in abduction, firstly, that really pisses me off, but secondly, the more I thought about this while I was doing my research, the more I feel like Sherri tried to pull small details from other kidnapped victims' survivor stories and use them in her own to make it sound more believable. For example, the Hispanic music always playing from a big speaker outside the bedroom door. That sounds an awful lot like Michelle Knight, Amanda Berry, and Gina DeJesus' recollection of how they spent their time in Ariel Castro's house. The part where Sherri says that it was always cold and she had to use a plastic tub filled with kitty litter, that sounds a lot like the bucket toilets in the Cleveland 3 case also. And I don't know, I could be thinking too far into this, but it feels icky to think that she could have possibly pulled small details from true survivor stories to make up her own bullshit about being kidnapped. And did she truly not think that the police would figure out that she was full of shit and that none of this happened to her? Like, did she really think that she was just going to show up and they were going to send her back home and never ask a single question? I think that's what she thought. I really do. But that's all I have for you this week. Let's do a review of the week, and then let's get out of here because it's spring break, y'all. And this week's review is coming from Facebook. Y'all don't forget, if you don't have an iPhone, you can also leave a review on Facebook. This review comes from Caitlin Lena, and it says, "Love it. I just started listening a little over a month ago. I listen while doing housework, laundry, and it makes it so much more enjoyable. Sadly, I'm already caught up and have to wait for new episodes. Tried listening to a few other true crime podcasts, but it's just not the same as the great storytelling that you get here. Girl, you can get a lot of extra episodes over there on Patreon. That's all I'm saying. I'm playing. Okay, y'all. I gotta go. I love you so much. Let's do it again. Same time, same place, next Wednesday. See you then."
That's how my mama murdered a podcast.